Hi, Assalamualaikum. My name is Nur Hazira binti Momarahim.
My name is Nur Afifa binti Ahmad Yazi.
My name is Nahamidah binti Muhammad Kamal.
Assalamualaikum and hi, my name is Nuri Fadli Fikra binti Omar Rusti from KM1102A, and today I and my fellow friends are going to talk about separation of powers. What is separation of powers? Separation of power refers to the division of government responsibilities into distinct branches to limit any one branch from exercising the core function of another. The intent is to prevent the concentration of power and provide for checks and balance. The traditional characterization of the power of the branches of government, which are legislative, executive, and judicial. The first branches, which is legislative, is responsible for enacting the law of the state and approaching the money necessary to operate the government. The second one is the executive. Executive is responsible for implement and administering the public policy enacted and funded by the legislative branches. And the last one is the judicial branches. It's responsible for interpreting the constitution and law and applying their interpretation to controversy brought before it. The first modern formulation of the doctrine was that of the French political Philips Montesquieu in the Esprit de Louis. In his book, in 1748, The Spirits of Law. Montesquieu argued that liberty is most effectively safeguarded by the separation of power, was inspired by the English Constitution, although his interpretation of English political realities has since been disputed. His work was widely influenced, most notably in America, where it profoundly influenced the framing of the United States Constitution. The document further precluded the concentration of political power by providing staggered terms of office in the key government bodies. Modern constitution systems show a great variety of arrangement of legislative, executive, and judicial process. And as the result, doctrine lost much of its rigidity and dogmatic purity. In the 20th century, government involved in numerous aspects of social and economic life result is an enlargement of the scope of executive power, a trend that accelerated after World War II. 40 state constitutions specify that government be divided into three branches, which is legislative, executive, and judicial. California illustrates this approach. The power of state government are legislative, executive, and judicial. Persons charged with the exercise of one power may not exercise either of the others, except as permitted by the Constitution. While separation of power is key to the working of American government, no democratic system exists with an absolute separation of power or an absolute lack of separation of power. Government powers and responsibility intentionally overlap. They are too complex and interrelated to be neatly compartmentalized. As a result, there is an inherent measure of competition and conflict among the branches of government. In Malaysia, there are some overlapping parts between the three organs of government. There are two senses of separation of power, which is strict sense and liberal sense. Malaysia follows liberal sense under West minister system, which is this means there will be overlaps in function and membership between the legislature, executive, and judicial, but on condition that there should be check and balance between the three organs. The three organs can overlap in person, membership, function, and powers. Besides that, the Prime Minister and the Minister are formed the Dewan Rakyat and Dewan Negara. Minister come from the Parliament is a lapse of separation of power as well. The two organs should be separate in membership and function. That's all from me. Thank you, and let's listen to what others members are talking about.
Next, I will continue with reason for separation of power. In a government has three branches, which is executive, legislative, and judiciary. These three branches need to separate. According to Montesquieu, the function performed by different body of person should be limited to its own sphere of action without encroaching upon the others. He added that concentrated of power is dangerous and leads to despotism. So means no one person or body should rest with all these three types of power. Separation of power is needed to enjoy to political liberty. Why must this power separate? Why not combine on? Okay, here is for the reason. The first reason is to create check and balance among the three branches of government. Check and balance make sure that three powers interact in accountable and balanced way. So means no intervention from the other branches because every branches has their own responsibility and the responsibility is not same with other branches. As example, in US, governmental authority branch is divided between the executive branch that controlled by the president that nominate the judges, while the legislative branch is controlled by the Congress, who is confirm the nomination, and the judicial branch is controlled by Supreme Court that can declare law passed by the legislative unconstitutionally. The second reason is to abolish the concentration of power. Like I said before, concentration of power is dangerous, so separation of power can control and prevent the action that has been done by people who has full of power to control all branches. It is known as a dictatorship. As example, in North Korea, all decision that made is based on one person and the citizens are forced to accept their leader. This way allows the leader to maintain her position and stay ruling the country. So to avoid the concentration of power, we have to separate the power. The next reason is to avoid violence and cruelties of dictatorship. When one person controls everything, it leads to misuse the power because of they will make decisions for their interest and priority. Without monitoring and balancing the power, will lead to violence among the people, and this make them freely to do anything they want. They don't even think the effect that will face by people under them. To fix it, separation of power is the way that can protect the fundamental freedoms of citizens and avoiding tyranny. Lastly, to ensure the accountability of government and hinder cooperation. Separation of power is intended to make them effectively then achieve desired goals. If no separation of power, it can lead to potential abuses of power and reduce transparency and accountability like in many countries right now. The government disputes because of the corruption scandals. So government should act according to certain well and establish rules of law.
Okay, I will explain a little bit about the disadvantages of the separation of power or we better known with their short name SOP. Okay, first of all, the separation of power not completely workable in a practice, which means the principle states that the organs of government must be independent each other, but in countries where the ruling government has majority in parliament, the executive arm is able to control the legislature through its member in parliament. Also, in some modern presidential system, most bills emanate from the executive and the legislature has only been reduced to a rubber stamp. Okay, next is they may create a friction among the organs of government. Okay. This concept of separation of power is that if it strictly applied, it can lead to friction among of um, the various arms of government. This is true because where there is the need of there's the need for cooperation, the arms of government may stick to their role and refuse to cooperate. This may lead to a deadlock in government. Okay. The next is we can tell that these disadvantages of separation of power also is not enough to guarantee the liberty of citizens. Okay. It may be true that separation of power can protect the liberty of the individuals. However, this may not be effective if it operates in isolation. There must be in existence some other ingredients like a free press, active pressure group, and ombudsman. Okay, then it is also not compatible with a parliamentary system of government. Okay. In a parliamentary system of government, the three arms of government are fused. The members of the executive are at the same time the members of the legislature. Until recently, the final court of the land was at the same the legislature. Okay. Therefore, the concept cannot work in this type of government. Okay, last but not least, this separation of power also complicates the policy making process. Okay, it is a complicate the policy making process, which inevitably making its time prohibitive. It is arguable whether having a centralized government in a unitary state would be less demanding in terms of resources and would inevitably be less expensive. Against this backdrop is the procedure for making laws themselves. Occasionally, you will have lengthy consultation and negotiation that are prevalent in the law making process. Okay, that's all.
In conclusion, the separation of powers facilitate daily affairs of the government. Unsurprisingly, most people believe that the concept of separation of power is essential in governing the political system of the country. Every branch can work easily because each other know their job and tasks. However, all three branches, which are executive, legislature and judiciary, constitute the powerful ideology of effective political system in the country. Then, separations of powers advocates new measures when the rights of people are threatened. Doubtless, the separation of power is a decision for the process of devising the protection of the liberty and rights of the people. The theory serves as a safeguard against the despotism of the king at one time and the parliament later on. Thus, In a modern society, implementation of separation of power is an extremely difficult task. Separation of power makes the government doing well without interferences from others. So this is how check and balance happens. History had shown them that the concentration of power in the hands of few leads to a government that failed to account for the welfare of all. By separation of power, it also can protect the interests of the people in that country so that the people can live in peace and work together with government.